Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Basra, Daf Zayin. Get out your calculators. It's one of those mathematical gemaras for the Amud Aleph, and we're starting 2/3 of the way down on Chavav Amud Beis at the two dots. The Gemara picks up on a din that we closed with yesterday. Amar Ula, he says on the bottom of Chavav Amud Beis at the two dots, Ilan hasamuch lemetzar. Let's say that I have a tree that's close to your border, and it's close enough that it's besoch sheshesrei amma. If my tree is within 16 amos of the border of your property, then gazlanhu. Then the roots of my tree are gazling. They're stealing to gazlan from the good dirt and the good moisture of your property. And because that's the case, ve'ein mevi'en mimenu bikurim. Because of that, the tree, which is a gazlan, is not. We're not able to bring bikurim. That's already considered halachically inappropriate. And the reason why is because, as Rashi points out, halfway down Dibur Hamaschil ve'ein mevi'en, Rashi says ve'ein mevi'en mimenu bikurim, ein tzarach lahavi mimenu bikurim. We don't have to bring bikurim from a tree where the roots are taking from another one's property. Debo'inan asher tavi me'artzecha. What a gorgeous Rashi, so clean and clear. That Rashi says that we are not allowed to have a case of bikurim unless it's me'artzecha. But it's not me'artzi. It's I'm taking from someone else's land because my roots within 16 amos. That is something that is considered gzela. And the Gemara wants to know where Ula got this halacha from. Let's get into some mathematical Gemaras. The Gemara says 7 or 8 lines from the bottom of Chavav Amud Beis. Minalei le'ula ha. How does Ula know about this din, that 16 amos are the crucial amos, and that if they traverse into the neighbor's yard, that the fruits of this particular tree are no longer shaykh to the mitzvah of bikurim? Ilei mamiditnan, if you want to say that it's from a Mishnah in Maseches Shvius, the Mishnah says, imagine that you have a field. Eser netios hamifuzaros besoch besa. Imagine that you have 10 saplings that are spread out in a besa. A besa is a field that is 50 by 50 amos. So that's 2,500 square amos. So the Gemara says, Chorshin kol besa b'shvilan ad Rosh Hashanah, that even in the last part of the last year prior to Shemitah, the halacha is that up until Rosh Hashanah, for these 10 saplings, you're allowed to prepare the ground and work the ground for them, even though otherwise we really wouldn't have worked the ground, ayin in the Rishonim. But here what we're saying is that if you have 25 saplings, 10 saplings over 2,500 square amos, so then that is considered to be mutter according to the Mishnah and Shvi'is. The Gemara says, Kama havaluhu, how big is the area of a besa? The Gemara says, Trei alfin, 2,000, V'chamesh mea garmidi, 2,500 garmidi units, 2,500 amos squared. Okay, so it's 50 by 50. And l'chol chad v'chad kama matile. When we look at the fact that there's 2,500 amos squared, and the fact that we have 10 saplings in that 2,500 amos squared, how much area does each tree get? Kama matile, masan v'chamshin. We divide by 10. If there's 2,500 amos squared in a besa, and there's 10 saplings, that means that 2,500 divided by 10 is 250 square amos per tree. Now, what did Ula say? Ula had told us that the square footage that we need for a tree is 16 amos in each direction, which really is 32 amos by 32 amos. But over here, what we're saying is that each sapling gets 250 amos squared, and the square root of 250 is just shy of 16. It's 15.8. So what you have is a problem. We can't say that Ula learned the fact that a tree has 16 amma roots that are considered stealing if they traverse into the neighbor's yards. You can't say that it's 16 in all directions, which is 32 by 32. Why? Because the Mishnah in Shvi'is seems to say that every tree gets 250 square amos, and the square root of 250 is only approximately 16. That's half the amount of Ula's dedicated root of 32 amos square, and therefore, halo have de Ula. This is not the right measurement for Ula. It can't be that he's learning from this Mishnah in Shvi'is that as long as the roots travel 16 amos in any direction, that's considered to be part of the tree. So let's try a second possible answer as to how we know Ula's din. Let's review Ula's din. Ula said that the primary nourishment of a tree comes from the first 16 amos of roots that come out of a tree. So if my arm is the tree, I've got 16 amos this way, and 16 amos this way, and this way, and this way. That's a box of 32 by 32 minus the area, minus the surface area, the girth of the tree. So we're going to ignore that for this math. 32 by 32. That's what the Gemara says. But the Mishnah says, no, it's only 16 by 16. So that can't be our source. Ula doesn't fit with the Mishnah and Shvius. Let's try again. The Ella, perhaps we can say that there is another Mishnah. This is in the same parak, in the first parak of Maseches Shvius. The Ella miditznan, 2 lines from the bottom of Chavav Amud Beis. Shlosha ilanos shel gimel b'nei adam. Let's say that there are 3 trees, each belonging to a different Jew. Hare'elu mitzdarfin. We allow these 3 trees to combine, and as mentioned earlier, to allow for work in the 11th hour of the 6th year up against Shemitah, because as long as it's for those trees, it's good to go. You can't use it as preparatory for the field into the Shemitah year. That's not appropriate. So there meets Tarfin. V'chorshen kol beisa b'shvilan. And for these 3 trees, we're even allowed to plow the whole field, even though it's Erev Shemitah. So says the Gemara on the top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, when you do the math, you have 3 trees in a beisa. Kama habulahu, how much is the space of the beisa? Same as before. Trei alfe v'hei mea garmidi. 2,500 amos squared. Good. Now, because there are only 3 trees here, we divide the amount of space of the beisa by the number of trees. And the Gemara says, L'chol chad kama matile, when you take 2,500 and you divide it by 3, because we said in our case in this Mishnah, Parak Aleph Mishnah Hev Shvius, that each tree is just going to take up as much space as is allowed. How much space do they get? Kama chad kama matile, tamne meya, 800, vitlasin vitlasa, vitilsa. 833 and a third, exactly 1/3 of 2,500. And therefore, what we see is a number that's much closer to the number of Ula. Let's look back at Ula. I have my little calculator in front of me, and Ula had said that the area that's dedicated per tree is 16 amos in all directions. So if you take a calculator and you multiply 32 by 32, what you get is 1,024, which means that for every sapling or for every tree, the 16 amos in each direction means that Ula holds that the square footage of the area where we're concerned that the roots are not allowed to take from other people's fields is 1,024 square amos. What about this Mishnah, this second Mishnah that we learned in Maseches Shvius? There we said it's 833 and a third. That's square amos. Now, what is the square root of 833 and a third? That's 28.8. Now, Ula had said that the square footage of dedicated root space is 32 by 32. This Mishnah says that it's 28.8 by 28.8, very close. Not identical, but very close. It says the Gemara, Akati nefishe le de Ula. Ula's square footage, where he says the roots are primarily feeding this tree, is 32 by 32. The Mishnah in Maseches Shvius says it's 28.8 by 28.8. So the Gemara says, don't worry, lo duck, we weren't so exacting. I'm not sure. Yesterday, we were discussing how much on the Richter scale is considered a house shaking. We're very detailed people. Halacha is incredibly nuanced. Bar none, there are no other faiths that have the detail and the svarim shranks that we have. So you're going to tell me that 32 and 30 all of a sudden are the same? They are not the same. Not only that, says the Gemara, Amor de Amrin, and I'll grant you that sometimes we can say lo duck, sometimes we can say that when it works out l'chumra. But that's not the case over here. Over here, it would be l'kula. And therefore, lo dak mi amrinan. We're going to say an approximation. And Rashi highlights that according to this, if we were to take this approximation, it would actually turn out that the shita of Ula is a kula, because the gap in the 2 amma difference between The Mishnah's 30 amos square versus Ula's 32 amos square, and that gap of 2 amos in diameter, Ula would have said you're patur from bikurim, but the Mishnah would have said you're chayiv in bikurim, and you can't have a kula when you're approximating. That's not appropriate. It's approximate. We don't allow it. So therefore, the Gemara says you've made an error. We're not talking about a square. We're talking about a circle. Says Dr. Karesh.
Tree is circular. The chin. So the area around it has to be a circle. It can't be a square.
Says Dr. Karesh. Misavris biribua ka'amrinan. What kind of mathematician are you? What does that mean? The corners are longer. The angles are longer than the sides when you make a box. The Gemara says, who said we're talking about a square? Be'igula ka'amrinan. We're talking about a circle. Ula's din is not 1,024. It's not. It's 1,024 minus a quarter. Why minus a quarter? Says the Gemara. Michti. Kama meruba yoser al ha'igul. If you have a square, and inside that square is a circle, so the Gemara assumes it's approximately correct mathematically. I don't think it's exactly correct, but it's approximately correct mathematically that the answer is revia. It's a quarter. So let's remember, Ula said that 32 times 32 was the box. My father calls out, that's not normal. That's not how we do math. That's not 16 amos. It's more on the corners. So the Gemara says, fine, let's take off a quarter. So let's multiply that number by 0.75. And what we get is 768 square amos. Pashu lahu, says the Gemara, Zayin Mea 700, Vishisin Utmanya, and 68. Now, when we look at the din of Ula through the lens of a circle instead of a square, which is way more accurate because what we're measuring is the 16 amos of roots that we need to be in our property to be chayav and bikurim, then the square footage that we started with that we thought was right is 1,024. No, it's not. It's 768 square amos. And therefore, says the Gemara, why don't we say that that's actually closer to the Mishnah in Maseches Shvi'is? Says the Gemara, well, akati pashle palga de amsa. Says the Gemara, we would still need to add another half of an amma. This is actually quite a sophisticated math line. What it means is that according to the new math of Ula, which is that it's 768 square amos, that means that the circle is 27.7 amos in diameter. But the Mishnah had it a little bit more. It had it at another half of an amma, and that's why it says, oh, it really is still different. It says the Gemara, Hainu lo duck. In this case, we can say that we're approximating, that we're not being exacting. Ulechumra lo duck. And for a chumrah, we're not going to be duck, but we're gonna be able to work it all out in this case. That's why the Mishnah works out. So this is how the Gemara concludes Ula's source. We're going to use the Mishnah in Maseches Shvi'is. Parak Aleph Mishnah Hey. The Mishnah with the 3 trees, that is the source of Ula and Shalom al Yisrael. Therefore, Ula now has a Mari Makom that teaches us that the 16 amos, not in a square, but the 16 amos that are inside a circle are learned be'erech from the Mishnah and Shvi'is. The Gemara now throws a number of questions at Ula. Tashma, 6-7 lines from the bottom, halfway down, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Tashma, Hakone Elon Vikarko, a person who buys a tree and a person who buys the land under the tree, maybe Vikore. The halacha is that they are allowed to bring bikurim and they could read the psukim, namely, we're not worried about the roots. The roots are all good. My lav kol shehu. Doesn't this imply, because there's no shiur given as to what roots there are, all the Mishnah says, I don't think it's a Mishnah actually. Nope. Yeah, it is. It's a Mishnah Bikurim. All the Mishnah in Bikurim says that if I buy a tree and its property, and it's a fruit tree, maybe Vikore. Without Ula's parameter of 16 amos. Kasha and Ula, says Gemara, lo, that's not true. Really, Yudvav Amma. Really, that Mishnah in Bikurim is talking about, it doesn't say it, but we're making an ukimta that it's just like Ula. And the second question, 5 lines from the bottom, Tashma. I buy 2 trees out of your yard. Maybe ve'eno kore. Now, halacha is that I am allowed to bring it as bikurim, but it's not perfect bikurim. And much as I can bring them, I'm not kore. I don't read the psukim that I would typically read. What are we medayek from this Mishnah, this Gemara, this Mishnah actually in Maseches Bikurim? That's only true by 2 trees. Hashlosha, Mevi v'Korei. Had it been 3 trees, then we would be Mevi v'Korei. My lav kol shehu here too. We don't see Ula's measure of 16 amos, and maybe we should therefore assume that this is a kasha on Ula because the brisa is silent about the shiur of the roots. No, lo hachanami yudvav amma. The Gemara shtups in an answer and says, no, still good to go. We're still going to assume that it's 16 amos. Toshma, question number 3 against Ula. Rabbi Akiva Omer, karka kol shehu chayev b'peu v'bikurim. Look at that, black on white. Here, the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Akiva, this is a Mishnah on Maseches Peah. He says that any amount of karka is chayev in bikurim. That's exactly against Ula. By the previous Mishnayos, it didn't have a shiur one way or the other. We made a new kimta that it was talking about 16 amos, but read this one. Rabbi Akiva Omer, karka kol shu chayev b'peya ubebikurim b'kosten ala pruzbol. So now we have a very strong question against the shita of Ula. Ula wanted to say that bikurim up to 16 amos. The roots up to 16 amos is bikurim. If it's anything, if it goes into the neighbor's yards, you're pater from bikurim. Says Rabbi Akiva, that's not true. And turning to the top of Chav Zayin and Beis, not only is all of that true, but another side din. We already have the bikurim halacha that we need. Okay, side din that we're able to be kona properties that don't have karka attached to them. We're able to be to acquire metaltalin. So big strong kasha against Ula. The Gemara responds on the top of Chav Zayin and Beis on the top line, last word on the line, and we'll be heading to the last word on the page as we finish up the parak of Lo Yachpor. How do we answer up this brisa about Rabbi Akiva, which is an explicit kasha against Ula? We're talking about a food that has a unique din. What is the unique din? That not that we've planted a tree, but that we've planted wheat. Why is wheat different? We don't care about the roots here because it's from the Shivas Haminin. Take a look at Rashi, 9-10 lines down. No matter what the root system is, it doesn't matter. When it comes to the Shivas Haminin, you're always chayiv in bikurim. So perhaps, says the Gemara, Ula is still right. Ula says that the 16 amos, absolutely that's the din. Just like we saw at the open of our Gemara on the bottom of Chavav Beis. What about Rabbi Akiva and the Bikurim? That's talking about Chitin. And Chitin is talking about the Shivas Haminim, because talking about Shivas Haminim, it's always going to be Chayiv and Bikurim no matter what the root system is. So says the Gemara. Question number 4. All right, one more. Elon, we have a tree. Miktsaso ba'aretz u'miktsaso b'chutz la'aretz. This tree is literally on the border. It's on the property line between Israel and non-Israel. It says the Gemara, Tevel v'chulin me'uravin zebazeh divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says, this is very confusing. He's like, we don't know what's what. The tree is nourished from the dirt of both Eretz Yisrael and Chutz la'aretz. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you what the din is, and it's not so pashut. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Hagadol b'chiyuv chayev, Hagadol b'pater pater. Just look at them. Draw an imaginary line straight up the middle of the tree. Everything that grows on this side, the Eretz Yisrael Dika side, that's going to be kadosh. Everything that grows on the other side is going to be chulin. He just looks at it and says, no problem. That's how Reb Shimon ben Gamliel answers up the question. Agadol b'chiyuv chayev and agadol b'pater pater. And Adkan, our initial understanding of this machlokes of Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is that lo pligi ala demar sover yesh brera umar sover ein brera. Perhaps this machlokes is that Rebbe holds that he doesn't hold a brera. We don't do any retroactive decision. We don't know where the nourishment came from. We're just confused. Ma'ashenkin Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that we have brera. Retroactively, I'm looking. Okay, it's on the right side. It's Eretz Yisrael Dika fruit. It's on the left side. All right, it's Chutz La'aretz fruit. No problem. So says the Gemara, this poses a little bit of a problem. Why? Because aval gadal bepater divrei kol pater. Everyone agrees that if the tree is on the chutz la'aretz side, you're pater from bikurim. But why? Where are the roots? They're in Eretz Yisrael. But according to this learning of the brisa of this machlokes, it seems to be that the roots don't matter. And that is a kasha and ula from where we started today. Zog the Gemara, 10 lines down. Hacha b'mayoskina. No, what's the machlokes Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? That underground there's a metal plate that is literally the property line. So the roots are 50% to the right, and then they're completely blocked, and then they're 50% to the left. Demafsik tsunma. That's what Rashi says. And if you look at, that's what Rashi says over here, 12, 15 lines down. Rashi, demafsik tsunma. Be'emtza shrashim. She'ein shnei tzadin yicholin liyonik zemizeh. The roots from the right side in Eretz Yisrael can't draw from the left, and also reverse. The roots from the left side can't draw from the right. There's a big fat metal plate. Let's call it 100 feet wide, 100 feet deep. The roots on the right are pure Eretz Yisrael. The roots on the left are blocked by a metal wall, pure Chutz La'aretz. There's no mixing of the roots. That says the Gemara. That's what the Machlokes says. That's Aru Kimta. To ask the Gemara, Ihachi. Wait 1 second. If the roots are so clearly divided that the roots are 50-50, the roots on the right side of the metal plate are Eretz Yisrael and on the left are Chutz La'aretz, then my time of the Rebbe. Why is Rebbe confused? Why does Rebbe say that we don't know what the roots are? Yes, we do. The roots on the right are from Eretz Yisrael, and the roots on the left are from Chutz La'aretz. That says the Gemara, because the Hadre Arbe, what happens to the roots? They connect to the tree. What's the trunk? A combination of all the roots. So because what's happened, xylem and phloem, all the water is pulled in from the roots, gets into the tree. Guess where the water goes? In the trunk. And then it goes up the trunk and it feeds and nourishes all of the fruits. So Rebbe says, but what about the trunk? That's adorable that you can separate the roots with a metal plate. Great. But at the end of the day, the tree is being nourished by both sides. So that's why Rebbe was still confused with the Shita. Therefore, what is the actual machlokes with this new ukimta of the Gemara? Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Avira Mevalbel. According to the Shita of Rebbe, the trunk is Mevalbel. It says Avira, which literally means air, but in the context, it means that the trunk itself is mixing up all of the nourishment it gains from the roots. Umar Savar Hailuchude Koi v'Hailuchude Koi. And according to the Shita of Rashbag, he seems to say that no, the nourishment is really still separate. L'maiset, that's not what he means biologically. That's not what he means is happening inside the tree. Everyone will agree there's only one watering system in the tree. But he's saying, halachically speaking, that the fruits on the right side are nourished from the roots on the right side. And the fruits on the left side are nourished from the roots on the left side. It says the Gemara, that is how we understand this machlokas, and therefore, still no machlokas, nothing that really uproots the shita of Ula. Asks the Gemara, hold on 1 second. Ula made a comment at the open of our Gemara today that 16 amos is the measure of our primary nourishment, 16 amos of roots. Asks the Gemara, a quarter of the way down. Where haven't we all been sitting here learning, pounding the books? We just said yesterday, Pashut, that 25 amos is required if I plant a tree so that I don't ruin your pit, which means that roots extend way beyond. And we know this certainly. I don't know what the longest roots in the world are. It's many miles, I'm sure, of trees, for sure. And they stabilize trees, they chase water. It's a brilliant thing. Unbelievable. So, but forget all of the biology. We have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says 25 amos. So why are we saying 16 is the key amount and not the 25? Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Mezal Tuva Azle. No, I'm asking. Abaye says 100%. These roots are going to travel for massive distances. Akhushe lo mekachshe, but it's not going to ruin the tree anything beyond 16 amos. If I cut it at 16 amos, we're going to be totally fine. Ela ad sheishes, right? That's the ikar amount. And tvei lo mekachshe. And if there's more than 16, then you don't have anything to worry about. Says the Gemara, a third of the way down. Ki asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar ba'minei Reish Lakish me Rav Yochanan. A question was asked from Reish Lakish to Rav Yochanan. What was the question? It'll sound familiar. Ilan hasamuch lemeitzar b'soch yud vav amma mahu. This is Ula. What would be if a tree was planted within 16 amos of the border? So says the Gemara, Amar le, he says just like Ula did, Gazlanhu ve'ein mevim mimenu bikurim. Exactly the din of Ula. So this din of Rav Yochanan, we're going to call this version number 1 of Rav Yochanan because there's another version coming. But in this first version of Rav Yochanan, it's exactly Ula hand to glove. Perfect. That if it's within 16 amos of the neighbor's border, you cannot bring bikurim because that tree is a gazlan, because the roots are going to be more than 16 amos. That means they're going to be pulling from the neighbor's yard. Gazlan, and therefore it's no bikurim. However, Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he says the name of his Rabbi, and it's obviously a machlokas in Talmidim. The Gemara says, Echad ilan hasamuch lemeitzar, ve'echad ilan hanote, mevi v'kore, shal menaskin hinchel Yoshua liYisrael ha'aretz. He says we have an override. The override is that when Yoshua helped us to get into Eretz Yisrael, there was a fundamental din. You can plant your tree wherever you please. Roots, no roots, we don't pass them like Ula. And Lamaisa, what it means is that you can bring Bikurim anywhere. It's being yonik from the neighbor's yard, we're not concerned. Shalmanas Kain, Hincha Yoshua Yisrael Ha'aretz. Beautiful. That brings us to the next Mishnah, 2 more Mishnahs till the end of the Perek. This is halfway down on the last of the short lines on Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Let us continue. Ilan shu nota l'stei chavero. If I have a tree that's leaning into your yard, kotzetz melo hamardea al gabe macharisha. Then I, who am sitting on top of the macharisha, I can take the stick that I use to hit my animal. Let's say it's a 3-foot stick. Then I could cut anything in that 3-foot range. So let's say my arm is 1.5 feet, and the stick is 3, so I can cut 4.5 feet. I'll take my sickle and I'll cut 4.5 feet of your tree that's hanging into my yard. Ubecharvu b'shikma, if we're dealing with a carob tree or with a sycamore tree, keneged amishkolos, it would actually be anything that measures to be on the wrong side of the fence. The Meforshim here explained that this is like a plumb line, which is used for very, very exacting measurements as to what is considered perfectly vertical. When they built my basketball court, they actually, in my backyard, they used a plumb line when they were placing the wood because it had to be at a very specific angle to my house. And in fact, it was a big deal because my house is a little bit off kilter from the alley. It's not 90 degrees. It's actually off. So we had to decide, did we want the court to align with our porch or to align with so they used a plumb line. The plumb line basically says the fence is exactly here. And the din is that if it's a carob tree or if it's a sycamore tree, it's keneged amishkolos. I can cut every single branch that's hanging on my side of the fence. No problem at all. Beis hashlachin, if it's a place that's irrigated, kol ha'ilan keneged amishkolos, then it can be cut similar to the case of the charav and the shikma. Abashal omer kol ilan srak keneged amishkolos. Any barren tree, any non-fruit bearing tree can also be cut at the fence line all the way up to the heavens, no problem at all. Ibayalahu, the Gemara asks a question 2/3 of the way down, 3 lines into the wide lines. Abashal, the line of Abba Shaul in our Mishnah, the last line, take a look at it right above where we are. He said, Kol ilan srak keneged hamishkolos, that if you have a fruit tree, if you have a tree that doesn't have any fruits, it's a barren tree, that you can cut at the fence line. So says the Gemara, how do we understand Abba Shaul? Is he aresha koi? Is he going on the first din of the Mishnah? O asefa koi? Or is he going on the second din of the Mishnah? Is he going on the ilan hu nota l'stei chavero line? Or is he going on the beis hashlachin line? So says the Gemara, I have an answer for that. Toshma, the Tanya. Beis hashlachin, if there's an irrigation system, then Abba Shaul Omer, kol ilan keneged amishkolos, mipnei she hatzel ra lebeis hashlachin. You're allowed to cut it because it's bad for the beis hashlachin, it's bad for the irrigation system. Shmami no aresha koi shmami. And therefore we see that Abba Shaul is going on the resha and not on the sefer. Omar Rabashi must nisanami deka. He says, I could bring nacharaya, I can bring another raya for you that this is true, that Abba Shaul is going on the resha. Diktani, kol ilan srak. That is talking about all non-fruit bearing trees. Iamris bishlam al resha koi. If you want to say that the language of kol ilan srak is talking about the resha, I got it. 7 lines into the wide lines. Chav zayin amud beis. Hainu diktani kol ilan. No, that's why it says kol ilan, because it's kol ilan against kol ilan srak. Eloi amris as seifa kai. But if you're saying that Abba Shaul is only going on the case of beis hashlachin, ilan srak mi boile without the word kol. Elolav, it must be shmami no aresha kai shmami no. We bring a double raya that Abba Shaul is arguing on the resha of the Mishnah and not on the seifa of the Mishnah. That brings us to the final Mishnah in the Perek, Chav Zayin Amud Beis, 3/4 of the way down. Ilan shehu nota l'rishus harabim. If we have a tree that's leaning over into the rishus harabim, and that's a place where camels go, camels with their packages. So this is a machlokes tanoi. Kotzeitz kedei sheyeh gomal over v'rochvo. According to the Tanakama, we have to cut it in a way where a camel is able to traverse that space with the rider on. So let's say a camel 6 feet tall, and the rider sitting on top adds 2 more feet. So that means if there's trees hanging over into the public space, I can cut 6 plus 2 feet. I can cut 8 feet of branch that's hanging over. So the city of Chicago is going to come out with one of those chainsaws, and they're going to make a line of 8 feet, and they're going to walk along the fence, and they're going to cut 8 feet tall worth of brush that's hanging over the fence. No problem. That's the Tanakama. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no. Gamal taun pishtan o chabile zmuros. We are talking about a camel, yes, but not with a rider on top, but rather with an animal that's carrying flax or that's carrying zemuros, carrying a bundle of branches. So this is a machlokes tanaim. When the trees are hanging over into the public space, how much are we allowed to cut? Is it a camel with its rider, which I approximated at 8 feet, or is it a camel with its packages? I'm not going to tell you if that's taller or shorter. That's the Gemara's question. What shita is more machmir, right? So says the Gemara. Let's finish up the Mishnah, excuse me. Reb Shimon Omer, kol ha'ilan keneged ha'mishkalos mipnei atuma. You have to cut everything. 8 feet is not enough. Cut every branch that overhangs into the public space because of tuma. I'll foreshadow, because of tumas ohel. Because we know that if there is tuma on the inside of the wall, and now the tree is hanging over, that's tumas ohel. And that can create a scenario of tuma. It says the Gemara, last 15 lines of the parak. Man tana de benizaken basar umdana de hashta azlinan. Who says that when it comes to the world of nizaken, we're only worried about the immediate? An interesting question. So says the Gemara, Amarish Lakish b'machlokes shinuya. This is taka a machlokes tanaim about whether or not halachically we're worried about the right now, or if we're actually worried about a time in the future. What does this mean? The Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanan, we have a Mishnah. This Mishnah can be found later in this Masechta, and the Mishnah reads like this. Ein osen chalal, tachas reshus harabim boros shichin u'ma'aros. You're not allowed to build cavities in a reshus harabim. You're not allowed to do that. Rebbe Lazar matir b'chdei shete'agala me'aleches ut'una avonim. Rebbe Lazar says you are allowed to do that as long as the cover of the cave that you've made is weight-bearing, either for camels or for rocks that should go on top of it. The first shita is concerned about the long term, that cover may rot and decay over time. And the second shita is only concerned about the short term, as long as it's able to tolerate the weight right now. Rav Yochanan Amar, that's not true. Our Mishnah isn't only thinking about the narrow time frame, it's also thinking about the longer term. Afilu tema rabbanon. How so? Hasam. Over there in regards to the case of digging under Rishus Harabim and covering it, Zimnin demafchis telabadaite. There we have a different concern because things break. Things break all the time. And therefore we're concerned about it. But aval hacha, in our case, when there are branches hanging out, kama kokaitse, when a branch grows, okay, you can cut it when the branch grows, but it's not, the cases are really not, it's not connected to the machlokes of, are we concerned about short-term or long-term problems? It's an unrelated issue altogether. Last two sugyas of the parak. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Gamal, if you have a camel that's telling Pishtanu Chaviles Muros, we don't know how this shita related to the Tanakama. The Tanakama says you can cut branches hanging over into the Rishus Harabim according to the height of the camel plus the rider. Let's call it 8 feet. But Ibayalahu, shiur de Rabbi Yehuda nafish or demashu de Rabbana nafish. Which shita is taller? Is the rider plus the camel taller, or is the camel plus the packages taller? Says the Gemara Pshita. It's obvious. I don't know why it's obvious to anyone. I don't know how packages were put on camel, but says the Gemara, Pshita de shiur de Rabbanon nafish. The sheet of the Rabbanon of the animal with the packages is greater than the height of a camel with a rider. The isal kadaitach shiur de Rabbi Yehuda nafish. If you want to say the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda is greater, namely that a camel plus a rider is higher in height than a camel with packages. Let's say that a camel with a rider is 8 feet and with the packages is 6 feet. Rabbanon b'shiur de Rabbi Yehuda hechi avde. How then would it make sense that they would even understand the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? How can the rider ever make it through? That doesn't even make any sense. It has to be that he is adding to the shiur, because otherwise a rider can never make it through. That doesn't make sense. If you want to say shiur d'Rabbanan nafish, if you want to say that the shiur of the rabbis is greater, then Rabbi Yehuda b'shiur d'Rabbanan my avid. Then you just reverse the question back the same way. If you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is a smaller shiur and the Rabbanan is a taller shiur, then according to Rabbi Yehuda, how do you get the packages by? So says the Gemara. Afilu efshar Rabbi Yehuda b'shiur d'Rabbanan my avid, says the Gemara efshar degachin v'chalif tuse. You can scrouch. You can lie down a little bit. When you get there, you just kind of lower yourself onto the camel, and then you're good to go. You'll put your head at the same level as the camel itself, and then everything will fit. But really, it could be that the sheet of the Rabbanan is more. Last sugya. Reb Shimon Omer, Kol Ilan Keneged Amishkolos Mipnei Atuma. What was the concern, this last sheet in our Mishnah that said that if there are trees that are protruding into the public way, you are obligated to cut every tree, no matter how tall they go. Not 6 feet and not 8 feet, not a camel with packages and not a camel with people. All the way up. You're taking the chainsaw 10 feet, 20, I don't care what it is. You got to remove it all. Why? Because the Mishnah said, and this was the sheet of Reb Shimon, the Mishnah says, Mipnei Atuma. And the Gemara says, Tana, we have a brisa, Mipnei Ohel Atuma. This is because of Tumas Ohel. Tumas Ohel stipulates that if a person were to walk under a tree, where at least some of the branches are 1 tefach wide, which is 4 inches approximately. So then you are in a scenario where if there's tuma under any other part of the tree, you then become tameh. If there's taharos in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the taharos become tameh. If you are a kohen and there's a mace or a sheretz, one of the shmona shratzim under the tree, then you become tameh. So that's why, according to Reb Shimon, we had to pull down and cut down all of the branches that are hanging from the private space into the public space. Says the Gemara, Pshita, that should be very obvious. Says the Gemara, no, labda, because there's another possibility for tuma. Says the Gemara, imi masnisen habamina dilma maisi orev tuma v'shadi hasam. Perhaps a raven will take meat and he will throw it onto the tree. And how would we solve that problem to avoid the tumor of Shimon's concern? V'sagya bedachluli. I could just thin out the tree, remove every other branch. Says the Gemara, that's not correct. Kamash Malan, that we're concerned about more than just that. We're concerned about Tumas Ohel, which could really mess up a Kohen. Ohel is a din deoraisa, because that's true. A Tuma could become puzzle, it could become Tameh. A Kohen, can become Tameh. And therefore, the din of Reb Shimon in our Mishnah is being touched by the Gemara to say that it's Tumas Ohel to preclude the possibility of the raven dropping some tarfus. So we're going to stop right here at the end of the parak. Hadron alach lo yachbar. Baruch Hashem, we finished another parak in Shas, and we have just finished the second parak of Maseches Bava Basra, heading to December when we finish the Masechta. We're almost there. We'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.